On this episode, we meet the president of Friends of Lafitte Corridor in New Orleans. Then we talk with a planner about the National Evacuation Conference in New Orleans. Stay tuned.
We're in New Orleans talking with Bart Everson. What's the organization you're president of?
Friends of Lafitte Corridor.
And what is the corridor?
Well, we're actually standing right in the middle of the Lafitte Corridor right now. It's about a 3-mile stretch going from all the way from the French Quarter to Lakeview through numerous different neighborhoods in New Orleans, actually. And it used to be, once upon a time, a navigation canal. After that, it was a railroad. So it's a transportation corridor that has now been kind of decommissioned. In fact, you can see the remnants of the rail lines here. They've pulled up the railroad, but you can still see the leftovers of it. Right now, it's just vacant space, about 3 miles of vacant space. And my organization, Friends of Lafitte Corridor, has been advocating to transform this space into a greenway, kind of having a pedestrian and bicycle path at the center of it, but also some linear, like a linear park, recreational amenities along it. And also we're just kind of advocating for the revitalization of the surrounding blocks, if you will, because we feel like everything is kind of connected together. We want to promote active, healthy lifestyles, people getting out and getting around in their community by foot, on bicycle, what have you. But we also understand that a healthy lifestyle is also got to be part of a healthy economy and a healthy neighborhood, and that all these things are interconnected.
Okay, so after being a canal and then a railroad, now that the railroad's been abandoned, who owns the land?
Well, most of the land has reverted to city ownership. So the city of New Orleans really has a great opportunity here to put together a great project, a great amenity for the citizens of New Orleans at really very low cost. A lot of cities that are trying to do this across the country have to go through a big land acquisition phase, and that's just not the case here. So we think it's a great opportunity.
So how long has it been since the rail line was abandoned and people started developing this idea?
Well, it first occurred to me when I was walking right in this area, actually, with a friend in the spring of 2005, and we actually saw them pulling up the rails. So that was 5 years ago. And my friend said to me, this would make a great rails to trails project. And that got me thinking. But as I started doing research on it, I discovered that this was actually something that the city of New Orleans had on the books for well over a decade before that. And going back even further, people have been speculating on this or proposing this as an idea since the 70s, at least. So it's something that has been talked about and acknowledged as a possibility for a long time. But New Orleans has a lot of needs. And a lot of, it's difficult sometimes to prioritize. So we've come together as a diverse group of citizens to try to prioritize this, to try to create citizen pressure, to say that, this is something that the citizens of New Orleans really want and need. It's something that could be done at relatively low cost to create a lot of value for the citizens of New Orleans.
So what's the next step? What's it going to take to move this forward now?
Well, we've gone through a lot of steps already so far. For example, we got a number of grants in the door to build certain sections of it. We've gotten a vision plan done by an architectural firm out of Baton Rouge, I believe. We have the City Council of New Orleans has designated this as something that is going to happen. The city has allocated money from the state, the community development block grant money, actually, that was allocated via the federal government after Hurricane Katrina. So this has been identified as a recovery project. There was even a request for proposals put out to which like 17 different firms around the country responded, and some really great proposals. Apparently, some firms that have done international work. One firm in particular was selected with, we were really happy with that. And it seemed like that was about to happen. The contracts were signed and everything was just about ready to go. And then HUD started asking some questions about how how grants were or how contracts were being awarded and so forth. And even though we felt this process was very clean and above board and good, the city terminated the contract and I think is going to rebid the process just kind of preemptively as far as we can tell. And then we've got an election coming up, so it's a new administration coming in because the current mayor's term limited. So right now we feel like this project has momentum, but it's hit a little bit of a stumbling block, and we're pretty sure there's going to be a little bit of a delay, but we've encountered a lot of delays along the way. So as a citizens group, all we can do is kind of gird our loins and keep moving on and realize we're in this for the long haul, and we're not going to give up, and we are going to continue to keep this keep this idea alive, and keep the citizen enthusiasm for it up.
So, in terms of your organization, what's it take to keep an organization like yours going over the years when this seems to drag on forever and maybe people get discouraged? And what's it take to get buy-in from the surrounding neighborhoods?
Let me tell you, it is tough. One strategy that we've used is that we're just a purely volunteer organization, so we move very slowly, and so a lot of times you can, when you're moving very slowly, you can all of a sudden look up and realize, wow, I've been working on this for years, and not even realize it. Every year we organize an event, a hike from one end of the corridor to the other. That's about 3 miles, and it's kind of rough in some places because the trail doesn't exist yet. The very first time that we did it, it was just 3 people. Then we had 16 people for a couple years, and then we had 60 people, and last year we had over 200 people. So the enthusiasm keeps growing. We try to keep it fun. We try to keep people focused on the positive, focused on the dream. But I've got to admit, it is challenging because in New Orleans, after the floods of 2005, there have been a lot of planning processes. The people have been asked to dream big dreams and participate in all kinds of different schemes, plans at the neighborhood level and at the citywide level for how we're going to rebuild and make this city better and so forth. And frankly, a lot of people are just burned out. So we're constantly looking for new ways to kind of keep it fun and interesting and focused on the positive.
Now, this is going to be a park and bicycle pedestrian facility. How is New Orleans as a city for bicycling? How will this fit in with the transportation overall?
Well, it's funny because I'm a bicycle commuter myself. I've lived in New Orleans and worked in New Orleans for 10 years, and I ride my bike to work pretty much every day for the last 9 years or so. And in some ways, it's really a great city for riding your bike because it's flat, just about as flat as a pancake. And the weather is pretty decent year-round. It gets a little cold in the winter, and sometimes it can rain heavily. But it's really not bad. On the other hand, the infrastructure isn't really there for bicycles. There's a lot of places where it's just not that bicycle-friendly by design. But that could be changed, and it is changing. In fact, just before the Katrina and the floods of 2005, the city put out a bond issue to build all kinds of bicycle infrastructure was part of it. And, of course, that kind of got put on the back burner after the flooding. But we're coming back to that, and New Orleans recently did make a list of kind of top 10 list of bicycle cities in the country, and that was kind of took everybody here by surprise, but it also, I think, put people on notice that we need to do better in regards to that particular piece of how you get around New Orleans. It's also a fact that we have a very substantial number of folks in New Orleans who do not have access to a car, either by choice or by just hard economic necessity. So these are folks who are dependent upon public transportation, but also just on good old-fashioned walking and riding their bike to get around, to get to work, not just for pleasure or for exercise, but to functionally live their lives, just to get to work or what have you. And that's why it's so important to build projects like this, so that you can get to work and get to where you need to go on a bicycle or on foot safely.
So this corridor has been around here a while with the canal and the railroad. What's the historical significance of this corridor?
The corridor is actually kind of tied up with the history of New Orleans. So if you want to understand why New Orleans was founded, exactly where it is, for example, it's on the high ground of the Mississippi River near Bayou St. John. And this navigation canal then was the connection between those two. So as you walk along this area, you can kind of revisit the whole history of the city. There's all kinds of interesting historical places along the corridor. There are the homes of former jazz musicians from the very earliest days of jazz, and graveyards where they're buried. There's the Higgins facility where the Higgins boats were built for World War II, which Eisenhower said that that's what actually won the war for America. And they were taken down, they were built right on the corridor and taken down on the railroad to Bayou St. John and tested on Bayou St. John. So it's really just, as you walk along the corridor, one thing after another. And we want to, when the Greenway is built, we want to make sure that it incorporates elements of historical markers and so forth to educate people about this great history.
We're in New Orleans, Louisiana, talking with John Rennie, who's Director of Transportation Studies with the University of New Orleans. As the Director of Transportation Studies, what sort of things do you work on?
Well, I work on emergency evacuation, particularly for carless and vulnerable populations, and just finished up with the 2010 National Evacuation Conference here at the JW Marriott on Canal Street in downtown New Orleans.
What happened at the National Evacuation Conference? I mean, what sort of people were here? What did they talk about?
We had a really good mix of academics, professionals, and government folks who work in all aspects of evacuation planning. In 2007, I organized the National Conference on Disaster Planning for the Carless Society. And what we decided to do this time was to broaden it out a little bit more from just carless and vulnerable population groups to all people, and hence the name change to the National Evacuation Conference. We partnered with LSU, two research centers up there, the Stevenson Disaster Management Institute and the Transportation Center up at LSU, who we are partnered with ongoing, the Gulf Coast Research Center on Evacuation and Transportation Resiliency. And we wanted to have people representing all aspects of evacuation at this conference, including folks who do modeling, people who work with vulnerable population groups, sociologists who can look at communications and risks and things of that nature. So we had a really wide range of folks. About 300 people came out for this conference.
What have you learned since 3 years ago?
Actually, quite a lot. I've learned that on the one hand, we have done a lot, both here in New Orleans and in Louisiana and across the country. We've had a number of significant events, including wildfires. We've had some major evacuations for hurricanes, including the evacuation of New Orleans during Hurricane Gustav, which was the first ever use of the city-assisted evacuation plan. That was the deployment of an evacuation plan for carless and vulnerable populations, and it worked quite well. And here we were able to bring the folks who developed and deployed that plan and get them to talk to the attendees here about what went well and certainly what could be improved in the future.
What were some of the key elements of that plan? I mean, how do you move thousands of people out of a city on just a few days' notice?
The city-assisted evacuation plan in New Orleans moved 30,000 people, including vulnerable populations, carless residents, and tourists. New Orleans is a big tourist city, and on any given day we have a number of people here who don't have the ability to evacuate because they're tourists and they're staying in hotels and don't have cars because they don't need a car. They could walk around the French Quarter to the downtown. So the one component is to get the tourist-based population from the downtown to the airport and to to get them out. That's a discrete part of the plan. The other part, which is a bit larger, is getting all of the vulnerable groups to evacuate. And there's a number of different elements. There's a number of pickup locations around the city, and the people are able to get to their pickup if they can get to the pickup locations, and they don't have any physical disabilities. They are able to get onto city buses, which then bring them to a location point where then they transfer onto state buses and then off to shelters outside of the city in a safe zone. For the people who have medical needs or physical disabilities, they have the ability to register through the city's 311 call-in, and they have people go out and pick them up, bring them to the Amtrak station, and get on the trains. And they went up to Memphis. The plan went very well. The evacuation component. One of the things that we heard today from Colonel Sneed, who's the head of the city emergency management department, is that you need to plan for the return of the people. And he said that planning for the return takes just as much work, if not more. So, and the work we've done since the 2007 Carlos Conference, I've been watching the process and researching and talking to the stakeholders. And before the Gustav evacuation in 2008, we didn't really think much about the return of people. We thought, well, we just need to get everybody out of harm's way. But the reality, because during Katrina, people were gone for months. Well, during Gustav, fortunately, we weren't gone for months. We were able to come back a couple days later. And one of the things that we've learned is that we do need to pay more attention to not just evacuating, but evacuating and returning is an important part of it all.
Who was your keynote speaker this morning, and what do you have to say?
We had General Honore. He was a keynote speaker, and he was a very dynamic speaker. He's been hailed as a hero who came in and restored law and order into New Orleans immediately following Katrina, and doing it in a way that he's famous for, telling the troops to put their guns down and not treating the citizens that were stuck here in New Orleans after Katrina as prisoners or criminals, but treating them with dignity and respect. And he conveyed that in his messages this morning. I was very impressed because in his talk, and General Honore is a national correspondent, and he's involved in Haiti and a commentator at the highest level on these issues. And he particularly pointed out the need for us to really work harder on accommodating the vulnerable population groups. And, he wasn't prompted to say that. I mean, he said that because he really believes it. He also noted that, in America, we need to find the resources to plan. And I'm struck, just having finished the conference, with on the one hand, very excited and positive note that we've had such a successful conference with people from all over the country talking about all the good things going on. But in some ways, I feel like we're at the very beginning of a long road, and we have a lot of work to do in this country, because the norm in this country, in most cities and counties and states and regions, is that we are not really planning very well. We don't have good plans. Those plans do not take into consideration the vulnerable populations and the carless populations. So I hope that this conference, whether if we do it again in 1 or 2 years from now, will begin to be an ongoing process for continuing to push for the awareness of these issues, and that we as a country are still not really prepared. General Honore writes in his recent book, Survival, that we need to create a culture of preparedness. And I think that one of the unfortunate things yet is that of all of the major events that have happened, 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, all the big events that, will probably continue to hit this country, unfortunately, in the future, we are still making very slow steps to truly developing a citizenry that is prepared. And we need to work harder and figure out ways to make local, state, regional transit agencies and communities work better together and to really create a culture of preparedness.
And the speaker from a couple states over, from Alabama, was talking about their issue isn't moving people hundreds of miles away, but just having good stormproof shelters half a dozen miles away so you can get out of the storm surge zone where they have the tremendous destruction. How does that balance work between sheltering relatively nearby versus moving people to the next state over? Their situation might be quite different than your situation here.
Well, in my research, and I've studied in detail evacuation planning processes and plans in New York, Miami, Chicago, New Orleans, and San Francisco over the last 3 or 4 years. And what I have found is that Miami, which I think has the best evacuation plans of the 5 cities, has been able to develop a plan that gets people out of harm's way. And the people who live in the most vulnerable locations where the tidal surges can occur, there's a lot of information that the public puts out, and Miami doesn't get up and leave Miami. When Miami evacuates, the vulnerable locations in the region are evacuated to the safe parts of the region. Now, in New Orleans, we have a very unique situation because the American Red Cross has made the decision that they will not support any shelters south of I-12, which is north of Lake Pontchartrain. And I think that decision needs to be rethought because I live in the city of New Orleans on high ground in a historic area that did not flood during Katrina and would likely not flood ever because I'm 7 feet above sea level. There are buildings, schools, and other community buildings in my neighborhood that could be used for evacuating people right here in the city of New Orleans. However, because of the Red Cross not supporting any shelters south of I-12, we're forced to move 1 million people who live, south of Lake Pontchartrain out of the region to the north and the east and the west. And I think that is a waste of resources. I think we do need to go back to the drawing board and rethink how we can better utilize our resources, particularly in this economy when resources are hard to come by. Well, I would say in conclusion that the gentleman, Brock, who you mentioned from Alabama, hit on a very important point. The key thing is getting people out of a vulnerable geography, whether it's below sea level or in a storm surge location. And I think that we need to take a hard look at that. Now, Jim Schwab from the American Planning Association, who was one of the opening keynote speakers, said that we really need to better link the emergency preparedness and evacuation planning into our local comprehensive planning at the local and city and county levels. And that's something that we haven't seen very much of. I mean, I'm a land use planner and transportation planner. Those are the 2 topics that I study. And I do see a really natural link between local land use and comprehensive planning and being prepared for emergencies and evacuation planning. And I think that as a country, we do need to go back, re-examine our comprehensive plans, and utilize our comprehensive planning process through the lens of emergency preparedness to look at locating shelters that will be safe during a time of an emergency.
And as we're working on the comprehensive planning, where your transfer point is in the neighborhood or your shelter itself is in the neighborhood, what does that do for the role of pedestrians and walking as part of the evacuation procedure?
I think pedestrian planning is key and should be central to looking at any emergency evacuation plan. And unfortunately, we don't have enough research going on looking at the role of pedestrians in evacuation planning. I know there are some groups out there that do look at pedestrian issues in evacuation planning, but it was frankly a topic that wasn't covered adequately enough here at this conference. But I do hope in the future when we do this conference again that we can get more research and more participation amongst professionals who are working in that area, because the reality is that for people who don't have cars, they need to be able to get to a pickup point. And looking at how pedestrian issues factor into their ability to get to those pickup points is something that is really important and needs to be considered. The other thing, too, is that, we here at the conference obviously spend a fair amount of time talking about hurricane-based evacuation because we're along the Gulf Coast, but it's a national conference, and there was a fair amount of talk about no-notice disasters. Well, during no-notice disasters, being a pedestrian may be the only thing that you could possibly do to save your life. And that is another big element. When I lived up in the Northeast, and I lived in New Jersey around the time when September 11th happened, pedestrians were the main way that people were able to evacuate of lower Manhattan. And even during the blackout, there's a book called The Upside of Down, talked about how the pedestrian played a very important role of evacuating in Toronto during the blackout. And I think that we maybe don't think about it so much when it comes to hurricanes because we, think about, well, we need to get a long distance, ways away. But the reality is that all modes of transportation are very important to be considered, and particularly looking at the pedestrian, all trips begin and end with pedestrian trips. So, how do we get people from their houses to the pickup points? What's the role of a pedestrian during a no-notice disaster? For example, tsunamis or earthquakes, or terrorist attacks. There's a lack of research on pedestrians in emergency evacuation planning, and we really need to do a better job in the future of addressing that.
Visit us on the internet at www.pedestrians.org.